Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, How Connectivity Management Solves Challenges in the Evolving IoT Landscape, sponsored by Aeris. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. On the right-hand side of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type your question into the Q&A box and submit your questions to our speakers. All questions will be saved, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use, including a Twitter widget where you can see today's sponsors' live tweets. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow help widget. Here are my answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green resource list widget. Towards the end of today's presentation, we'll ask your feedback. A survey will pop up on your screen and will only take 1 minute to complete. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available about 1 day of the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I would now like to turn the event over to Enterprise Cloud News' editor, Scott Ferguson. Scott?
Thanks, Kate. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you find yourself today. As Katie just said, my name is Scott Ferguson, and I'm one of the founding editors of Enterprise Cloud News. And I would like to thank you for taking some time out of your busy day to join us for this very special webinar, which is being brought to you by Aeris. To help, our topic today is the Internet of Things, but specifically we'll be looking at the challenges of managing and securing a large-scale IoT deployment and what this means for IT, CIOs, and the enterprises that they work for. In order to better understand the IoT management landscape, we're going to be joined by a very knowledgeable guest. Evan Whitelock is a product manager for Aeris, and he's going to share some of his insights and observations about IoT. I'm going to let Evan introduce himself in just a few minutes, but first I wanted to share a few thoughts about the IoT market and the challenges that come with harnessing this technology for your business. So to get started, let's take a quick glance at the IoT landscape. By the end of 2017, Gartner is predicting that there will be 8.4 billion connected devices, and that's a 31% increase from just a year ago. In 2020, that number is going to almost double. It's going to hit over 20 billion connected devices. At the same time, by the end of this year, spending on endpoints and various services should reach the 2 trillion mark. Right now, the consumer market is the largest space for these devices. So that's your Nest, that's your connected doorbells, those type of things. But since we're in the enterprise, we're expecting deployments within businesses to hit 3 billion connected sensors and devices by the end of the year. And again, that's coming from some recent numbers from Gartner. And if we think about it a little bit more, we're also going to talk about security. And security, of course, remains a major concern within this market. And in order to get better security, you need better management. Now, if I could just put a free plug in for one of our recent reports on the site, to get a sense of the IoT security market, we recently commissioned a paper on that called Cloud Computing, the Secret Security Protector for IoT. And you can actually download that for free on our site. And the link is there if anybody would like to download that paper either today or a little bit later on. And when we're talking about getting management right, what do we mean? Well, the explosion of IoT devices and sensors means that enterprises and their departments and their IT departments are looking to gain more control. While IoT continues to explode, the number of deployment options, platforms, and architectures to manage all these devices continues to grow with it. So we need to ask ourselves some basic questions about where this market is going. For instance, if I want a management platform, should I go commercial or should I use an open source product? Open source products can offer a lot of flexibility and customization, so that might be what you're looking for. However, if you can get a commercial product that works, it can take a lot of the guesswork out of the whole deployment process, and it can save you some time and resources. And when we're continuing on this vein of getting management right, another issue we might want to ask ourselves is if we want to go local or move to the cloud. If your IoT project is using corporate LAN or private WAN networks, it might be better to keep it local. However, if you want to hook all your devices up into the public internet and gather the data from there, a cloud provider might be the best bet for your needs. And once again, we have Once again, we have a story on the site, and you can follow that link to it. It's written by one of our contributors, Andy Froelich, and he's a former CTO, and he talked a little bit about that on the site. So I encourage you to follow that link when you get a chance, and you can talk a little, and he'll talk a little bit more about that in his article. And finally, let's talk a little bit about the connectivity part. If we're looking at IoT devices, we're going to be looking at the network and different ways to make the connectivity work. So we have your sort of traditional connectivity technologies as part of this market. We have cellular, we have Wi-Fi, and we have satellite connectivity. However, and this is what Evan's going to talk a little bit about in just a few minutes, we have some other newer technologies coming on the market that can help you with your management deployments. There's LTE-M, which is specifically designed for IoT deployments, and it allows devices and applications to connect directly to a 4G LTE network without a gateway. We also have narrowband IoT, or NB-IoT, and that's another new standard which takes advantage of low power wide area networking, or LPWAN, and it allows for massive deployments and mixed connectivity environments. Finally, we'll also talk a little bit about low power wide area wireless, a group of technologies that provide long distance, low power consumption, and low data rate connectivity through the unlicensed radio spectrum. However, with this case, you have to remember that it's an umbrella term for many different types of technologies, and there is no single standard or spec. Now that we were able to kind of take a look at the overall market, I'm going to let Evan introduce himself. He's going to talk a little bit about Aeris. He's going to give you some of his insights into the IoT market, and he's going to talk a little bit about what it needs to manage a large-scale deployment in the enterprise. And with that, Evan, would you like to take it over and introduce yourself to our audience today?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate it, and thank you for that great introduction. So, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen in today. As Scott mentioned, my name is Evan Whitelock. I'm Product Marketing Manager here at Aeris, and in just a second, we're going to jump into kind of the discussion that we're going to focus on today around IoT connectivity management platform, why they're important, the challenges with expanding on some of the things Scott just touched on, the challenges with the evolving IoT landscape, and then what some of the solutions are that you should be considering. But before we do, I do just want to, for those of you who don't know much about Aeris, I just want to give you a little bit of background about what we do and why we're speaking on this topic today. So we are an IoT solutions provider, a global provider focusing on providing IoT connectivity, IoT management platforms, and then also IoT applications and analytics platforms to companies around the world, whether they're working on existing IoT deployments or adopting IoT for the first time. Today, a lot of the discussion is going to be around more of what we do on the connectivity and platform side and what we do there. And we, in addition to enterprise offerings, we also have a self-service connectivity offering called Neo, which you can check out at neo.aeris.com. Really meant to get customers started up on Neo or on in IoT and with connectivity. But we're going to be talking about more larger scale deployments and the challenges that they have. One more quick slide about Aeris to put in context kind of where we fit in the world, some numbers. Today we manage over 10 million devices, cellular devices on our networks globally, and that's across 2G, 3G, and 4G technologies. And those devices collectively are processing over 1 billion IoT events per day. We are a truly global company with operations in their connectivity reach in over 190 countries. And those 10 million units that we manage actually place us in the top 10 globally in terms of IoT units under management. And so, hopefully that provides a little bit more context as to why we're talking about this today. But enough about Aeris. I know that we want to jump into to what you guys came to listen to today, which is better understanding of connectivity management platforms, the challenges with the landscape in today's IoT and today's evolving IoT. And then also talking about some of the solutions. What can platforms do to you, for you to help you manage this landscape? And so we're going to dive into these, but I believe we have really quick one quick poll question for you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and toss it back to Scott. and then we'll answer this poll, talk about the results, and then jump right in.
Thanks, Evan. That's a great way to get everything started for the day. And as Evan did mention, we do have a poll question we want everybody in our audience to answer. Where are you? We want to ask, where are you in your IoT journey? So we have a couple different answers, and I'll give them to you while you think about it. Are you exploring if IoT is right for your business right now? Are you building a proof of concept at this point? Are you planning a deployment in the next 3 months? Or have you already deployed and are looking to scale? And I think if you answer that last one, I think we want to hear from you on the Q&A part of today's portion. And as Evan mentioned, and as Katie also mentioned at the top, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you do have questions for Evan or for myself, please feel free to use the module down there and shoot us over the questions you would like us to answer. We'll try to get to everybody as best we can, and we might follow up with you a little bit later. So let's take a look at the results of our poll question. So it looks like the majority of you, and I've seen this actually in other studies before, and I think Evan will probably agree with this a little bit right now. IoT remains pretty new. So right now, people are exploring if it's right for your business. So people are starting to see if this technology is really right for their business, but it's good because it's getting out there a little bit into the enterprise. Below that, we have folks that are building proof of concept. So you're taking the next step. You've kind of seen that, hey, I want to absorb some of this information, and now I want to see if it's going to work. So you're starting to build a proof of concept. Actually, a few of you are actually talking about already deploying to scale. I would probably guess that probably the folks that are looking to scale, you're probably in industrial IoT. I bet you're in the manufacturing sector. So you have a little bit more to gain from this, and the industrial IoT part is really kind of taking off right now. And finally, for those planning or deploying in the next 3 months, about 15% of you are in that. So we wish you a lot of luck with that as you start exploring that for down the road. So that takes us through our first poll question of the day. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Evan.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And no, good to see, the results. Thank you for answering that poll for us. To Scott's point, not surprising that a lot of people are just getting into IoT. It has so much potential, but it's just starting to get realized in some industries. And so that's great to see, especially for today's discussion. And there's a lot that we'll talk about that can hopefully help shed light on the best ways to go about moving into IoT. So the first topic that I want to cover today is to really talk about as you're planning a deployment or as you have a deployment, why the need for management is so critical for the long term and the scalable success of your solution. Why connectivity management platforms are so important. And it starts with the visibility and control that those platforms deliver to you managing your deployment. One of the big challenges with an IoT solution, the whole point of IoT is that these devices can be out in the field and you don't have to touch them, you don't have to interact with them in so many use cases. And so maintaining solution performance, ensuring that you as the owner and the manager of this solution know what's going on with your deployment, can identify issues proactively, is one of the big activity management platforms, because if you are reactively addressing issues and identifying issues, it's ultimately going to lead to a poor end user experience. If your customers are calling you to report an issue, that's not a very good model for you or for your customer, and it's not going to lead to happy customers and positive return on investment for them. And so maintaining visibility and control of your entire solution is critical to ensure that consistent performance and that consistent end user experience. The third topic up here, security, is also a very, very large concern, especially as IoT grows, as it starts to become a part of so many more verticals, so many more industries. Ultimately, these are connected devices, and they can be hacked and they can be used fraudulently. A lot of the big security breaches that have happened over the last couple of years have actually been with a lot of IoT devices. And the consequences of those attacks can be very significant. And so, I think we all remember the attacks. They were actually on security cameras that were vulnerable that took down, half the websites because of the denial of service attack. That was an IoT solution that was breached. And so, having a management system in place to help identify those attacks early is very critical to ensuring that solutions remain secure. Obviously, the upfront design is important, and that's a whole separate issue. But once a solution is deployed, making sure that you can monitor and understand what's going on is going to help you identify those issues and stop them and fix those issues before they become severely impactful. And so, the visibility and control that management platforms provide, and including giving actionable controls, the ability to troubleshoot remotely from a platform, is critical to make solutions are secure and they perform the way that they're supposed to, over time, and end users are happy. Now, in addition to the end user experience, another obviously very, very important component of an IoT solution and managing an IoT solution is keeping in mind your costs. The margins in IoT in so many industries are very, very small, and cellular costs and really just connectivity costs in general can get out of hand rather quickly if they're not monitored. And overage charges can kill a lot of business models if they're not prevented. And so, one of the things that a management platform allows, many users to do is to proactively monitor the usage and then the cost impact there as well. Being able to put alerts on devices so that if there's, say, a firmware bug, if there's fraudulent use, that can be identified and fixed early as opposed to waiting to the end of the month to see the invoice come in, and you experience what we call if your invoice is 3 times higher than you were expecting, because a certain percentage of your devices had some sort of issue that resulted in a significant increase in usage. There's not much you can do at that point to go recover those costs, and so it's very important to catch those issues early and stop those. Another aspect of cost outside of the cost for the connectivity itself is the cost that you incur for staffing a support system or staffing an operational system. We know that those operations and support resources are not cheap because they're very high value resources that come with a cost. And so making sure those teams are as efficient as possible. If your support engineers have to spend half a day trying to track down an issue that maybe with a management platform they can identify in 30 minutes, that's a lot of cost just from man hours that you'll incur. And so making your support teams as efficient as possible significantly reduces your costs. And then from a revenue perspective, going back to the end user experience, if customers are not happy, they're not going to stay. Making sure that your system your solution is performing the way it's supposed to, issues are identified early and fixed quickly, is going to create a better user experience, is going to create more stickiness between you and your customers. And management platforms can go a long way towards giving you these capabilities to keep your costs predictable and low, especially as you scale, which is our next point. It is, obviously if you've got a dozen devices out there, it's much easier to manage those devices without a platform than it is if you, say, have hundreds of thousands of devices deployed out in the field. The only way to manage those effectively and allow you to scale to hundreds of thousands of devices is to have a management platform do many things for you. We had talked a lot about the visibility and the control, but one of the other advantages that many platforms deliver is the ability to automate your supply chain. Be able to activate devices early on in your supply chain while you have them, say, in your manufacturing facility or with your contract manufacturer, wherever they may be, and be able to control, turn on and off the billing, for example, as those devices make their way through the supply chain. Not pay for the devices while they're sitting on a shelf, maybe put them in a suspended state, or be able to remotely activate them at some point down the line once they're actually getting closer to end user deployment. All capabilities that are available with management platforms, and all capabilities that are very difficult to achieve without management platforms. Expanding a bit on the operation side, again, the ability for a platform to reduce operational costs and keep processes simple. For deployments, there is a single set of steps to troubleshoot and identify issues, as opposed to bouncing back and forth and having to look at different reports on different platforms or different areas, having to send techs out to the field to identify an issue with the device. Being able to simplify your operational processes by putting them all on a platform, a single platform where you can manage those. And then internationally, as you look to expand beyond, where you first deploy, it becomes even more complicated to try to manage deployments at a very large, across very large geographic areas. And having a single platform where it gives you the seamless view of all those deployments, regardless of location, is really the only way to effectively scale your solution. So that kind of covers talking about the, why connectivity management platforms are important in the first place, and why to have long-term success and remain cost-effective and protect your margins without those management capabilities. And now we want to talk a little bit about how the IoT world is changing, and especially for those that have been in IoT for a little bit. The chunk of you guys that are either about to deploy a solution or already have a solution, this may resonate a little bit more. But looking at how IoT solutions have been deployed historically, they've been deployed in what I'll call silos, technology silos, and what I mean by that is you picked a technology and deployed on that technology, for example, cellular or Wi-Fi or satellite. And if you had multiple deployments, you may put a certain percentage on cellular depending on the use case versus Wi-Fi, but you were largely limited to the technology selection that you chose. If you had picked Wi-Fi for cost considerations, and there are justifications there given the relative low cost nature of Wi-Fi networks, that meant that you were limited from a mobility standpoint, limited to the area around that Wi-Fi router, Wi-Fi modem, versus cellular, which can be a bit more expensive, but you have the coverage benefits. And so a lot of those technology limitations have impacts on your ability to scale and your ability to optimize your solution over time. And not only are you limited by the technology itself, but you are in a large way locked into that technology or that provider. If you had deployment specific to a certain cellular network, a certain cellular operator, you were largely stuck to deployments on that operator with few options to fill coverage holes or get better pricing or any of those things that requirements that come up over time, especially as you grow. And so as the IoT world changes, a lot of new are coming out that are looking to address some of these traditional deployments that did have a lack of flexibility, and especially as IoT solutions become more complex, the issue of flexibility is becoming magnified. And when we look at the complexity around IoT, a lot of the new developments and the increased complexity are around new technologies that are coming out. And Scott had teed up some of these concepts a little bit when he was going through his introduction. But there are now multiple options or even more options for IoT solution builders when looking at which technologies to pick for their deployment. Historically, as I mentioned, a lot of solutions had picked cellular or Wi-Fi or satellite. But there are new, more IoT-focused technologies coming to market. Scott had mentioned LTE-M and also NB-IoT, and those are, cellular-based LPWA technologies have a lot of promise, but there's a lot of uncertainty around the benefits, that they'll provide, in the coverage availability and when the operators will actually be deploying them. Many operators have already started to deploy LTE-M, for example, but NB-IoT is still relatively new and still gaining traction, even though there are commitments by a lot of operators globally to deploy those networks. A lot of them are not there in place today. So for those technologies, what does the coverage look like? Is it good enough today, or do I still have to rely on existing, say, 4G LTE networks? And then contrast to a lot of the new additional LPWA, the unlicensed technologies coming out. Names you may have heard like LoRa and Sigfox and others, which these more proprietary private networks that are being deployed using the unlicensed spectrum certainly have lots of advantages with module and service being able to reduce those rather significantly. But there are a lot of uncertainty around which where those networks will be deployed, what markets can you rely on that coverage being there, and what is that going to look like, longer term. There's certainly uncertainty there. So it's additional challenges, additional things to consider when looking at which technologies to start evaluating and deploy on. That many of them have not been proven just yet, and lots of them have long-term uncertainty as to how long they will be around. Ultimately, picking one technology to go all in on and putting your deployment in that silo that I had kind of framed up on the last slide of picking one technology and sticking with it creates a lot of long-term risk for your solution if you're not sure that technology is going to be around in the long term or is completely scalable.
Evan, it's Scott. I wanted to ask you a couple quick questions that had kind of come in from the audience, but a couple of things that were top of my mind as well. And this is sort of like a two-parter, so we could maybe, we could start off and then hit the second part is, you just talked about the older technologies. So we're talking about, GSM or 2G or 3G. These are sort of the older standards that are sort of becoming obsolete right now, but they're still out there and they're still viable. So something like that, like how long do you kind of think that these type of technologies are going to be available for IoT deployment, and should folks really be investing in them at this point, or should they be kind of moving on to the newer, bigger things?
No, it's a great question, Scott, and thanks for chiming in on that one. So it's obviously a very large concern and one that's tricky to navigate given a lot of the uncertainty around specific timelines. As I think everyone knows, the carriers, the operators who own these networks and deploy these networks are highly, are much more focused and highly motivated to keep consumers happy, looking at smartphones and tablets. And so naturally, there's a push to move towards, the latest and greatest, the fastest technology. I know we are all very greedy with our desire to want to stream video faster and watch our YouTube channels and all of that. And so we demand those high usage networks, those high speed networks. The majority of IoT deployments don't need those networks, especially looking at solutions that are more focused on providing small bits of information, heartbeat type solutions, very low usage, low bandwidth requirements. The 2G networks are ideal for those, especially compared to the 4G networks. The modules they draw less power, and the coverage to date has been greater. But again, motivated by the consumer markets, those technologies are going away. We know it here in the U.S. that AT&T has already shut down their 2G network. And 3G is likely to be around for a couple more years, but not beyond 2020 in all likelihood. T-Mobile is the other major GSM provider here in the U.S., and their 2G network is likely to remain for another couple years, probably not much longer than 2021, 2022 or so. And 3G is probably going to be in a similar time frame, maybe pushed out by a year or two. And generally speaking, in the U.S., it becomes risky to rely on those networks for deployments that are expected to last, any time longer than the next 3 to 5 years or so. Our recommendation would be if you are looking at that, and you need your devices to be out in the field for longer than 5 years, incorporating some sort of LTE capability is likely the way to go, whether that's, LTE-M, or whether it's existing LTE networks, Cat 1, for example, and even modules and deployments that can fall back to the existing 2G, 3G networks. Not a bad way to go, especially today. Globally, it's a different story. There aren't the same pressures globally to move off 2G, 3G networks. Europe, for example, the expectation is that 2G networks will be around for the better part of the next decade, likely through 2025 or so. And so that is actually, a much more, from a much less risky, to pick 2G over there. simply because the networks are expected to be around longer. Ultimately, ultimately it comes down to how long your solution is going to be out in the field for. And anything longer than 10 years for most places, LTE is pretty much the way to go. And then depending on where you're looking to deploy, if it's shorter than 10 years, then you have some flexibility, but certainly want to consider capabilities for being able to migrate to LTE over the air, for example. A lot of the new solutions with embedded SIM cards, EUICC, and subscription management capabilities would allow you to add a 4G carrier profile to a device, assuming that you deployed with LTE bands, for example. But that's probably another topic for another webinar we'll think about. And so ultimately a lot of uncertainty, but it really comes down to how long your device is going to be deployed. So, Scott, I hope that answered your question.
No, that's interesting, and I think you kind of touched about this, but maybe you can kind of quickly just give us your opinion, and especially since Aeris is a global company, is there a better choice in the United States for this? I think you mentioned LTE, but I want to just make sure: is it LTE in the U.S. and then something else global, or do you have a recommendation for sort of a universal network that you should be running, or is there really a U.S. global sort of divide, or U.S. European divide, I guess we should say?
Sure. Yeah, and when it comes to LTE, to add just another wrinkle into this, unfortunately, when you look at LTE networks globally, many of them are being deployed on different frequencies, different bands, and so finding a module that has all the right bands globally becomes tricky and expensive. And until some sort of long-term solution is worked out there, I think that a recommendation would be to if you are looking at deploying in the U.S. and globally, for example, a module or a device that has LTE capabilities in the U.S. on the carrier of your choice, with maybe 2G, 3G, GSM fallback to leverage those networks globally, as those the 2G, 3G networks are pretty standardized globally in terms of the the modules that can access all those networks and enable a global roaming solution. That is probably, and that's a solution that a lot of customers are looking at today. Simply because it does help reduce the number of SKUs that you need to manage, while also allowing you to take advantage of coverage footprints globally. And on the non-cellular side, certainly technologies like Wi-Fi are relatively standardized around the world. And depending on if that network is available at your deployment location, that's another easier way to standardize that. A number of SKUs there. So, a lot of it is also based on the technology, but global solutions certainly add another wrinkle. So, hopefully that answered that question, Scott.
Yeah, because I don't know how many companies just would deploy something in the U.S. If everybody's global, you're definitely going to spread your IoT deployment out, somewhere else. Even if you're in the U.S., you might be deploying in Canada a little bit, and then that adds another wrinkle to that as well. So these are all very kind of interesting angles that we might not think about when we're doing deployments. But there's something, there definitely can add a lot of complexity to the whole landscape.
Yep, certainly. And even for those of you who are thinking about, maybe starting in the U.S., for example, it's always good to think about, what comes next, and making sure you're putting solutions in place today that enable you to scale when you do look to move beyond the U.S. into other countries, into other parts of the world. Thinking about these things now can reduce a lot of your headaches later on once you've started to actually expand and scale there. So it is a great topic to think about, and something that maybe perhaps as another webinar we'll continue to explore. So a lot of what we've going on to the next slide, and the complexity of the choices now that deployments have, solution providers have, is increasing. Given the a lot we just talked about, a lot of the challenges, a lot of the technologies. looking to pick either a single technology or a mixed technology deployment, what's the best way to go about that? Is a choice that ultimately there's no single answer, no one best practice to do it. It really comes down to what's your specific solution, your specific application, and so understanding what the choices are and what the different combinations are, and then how to best manage that operationally is something that does require a lot of thought and a lot of research, because the more complexity, the more technologies you add, the harder it can be to manage that deployment. Especially, it's likely that the different technology that you're purchasing and utilizing is going to come from different providers. And that can also mean then multiple different SKUs, multiple different devices that you need to manage. If you do have a device specific to the U.S. and a device specific to Europe, that introduces another layer of complexity in your supply chain and how to manage that. And so really it comes down to what's going to work best for you, and how do you go about if mixed technologies do work for you, and you want to be able to take advantage of the pros of each of the different technologies. How do you go about creating that mixed technology deployment that allows you to optimize and keep your operational costs down? And that's kind of really the key question that a lot of people are facing, and one that we want to answer here in just a second. But before we do, I believe we've got one more poll question for Scott to lead you guys through. So Scott, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Evan. I appreciate that. And as Evan said, we do have another poll question, and we're asking, what technologies are you considering or have you already deployed for your IoT solution? So we're going to get into a little bit about what you might be using that Evan and I both have been speaking about. There's cellular, Wi-Fi, short range, which is Bluetooth, Zigbee, and some other solutions within that, LPWA, satellite, or others. So if you can let us know about which IoT solutions you might be using. And Evan, when I let folks just take this poll really in just a second, I want to ask you one more quick question, and I think this is interesting, and we can kind of explore this a little bit later, but just to kind of get the conversation going, is what role does analytics play when you're picking out these different solutions? Are you using analytics to sort of see what would make the best solution? How's that sort of playing into this whole landscape?
It's a great question, and especially if you look at platforms, management platforms and what they can do for you. That's one of the things that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, but it is one of the more high value capabilities that platforms can give you. And platforms that can ingest a lot of information and present that information to you to basically allow you to identify trends over time. In my mind, in the way we view analytics, it's very much around providing additional valuable information to you about your deployment and how it behaves. You have what you need to know where to optimize. Especially as you scale, as you expand your deployment, the more data that you can gather from your devices, what hours of the day are they most active? What are the cost trends over time? What are the cost trends within any given day, hourly, or weekly window? Being able to have that information analyzed and presented to you so that you know how to best optimize your deployment. That's really where I see analytics come into play, is giving you the information and the power to know where you can improve. No solution is perfect from the get-go, and no solution remains perfect over time. The ability to understand and adapt and improve is one of the things that we see is a big differentiator between IoT solutions that are successful and those that maybe have trouble growing.
Interesting. Well, we'll kind of continue on that vein in a little bit. I did want to give the results of our poll. It seems that Wi-Fi is the #1 choice for folks when they're talking about IoT. That's 44%. Cellular comes in second place with 31%. Short range, that's Bluetooth, Zigbee, and some other stuff, that's at 10%. And after that, everything kind of falls off from that point. We have LPWA at just about 7%, satellite at about 3.5%, and for those using some other solutions, you're also down there at about 3.5%. So we really appreciate your feedback in those polls. And with that, I'm going to let Evan take over the last part of his presentation, and then we'll get to some Q&A in just a minute.
Great, thank you, Scott. And so that's great to see. Very interesting to see that there's a relatively good mix of technologies. I'm not surprised that cellular and Wi-Fi are the ones that are in the lead. Again, being more traditionally relied upon to support IoT solutions, but the interest in the additional technologies, I think, speaks to the fact that there are pros and cons for all the different technologies. And so how do you go about mapping that out, planning that out, and being able to take advantage of all those technologies? One way to do that is to put all those technologies on a single connectivity management platform, where if you do have different devices on different technologies, be able to manage those holistically as if they were one deployment. Simplify your operational processes and reduce those operational costs by being able to see all of those devices and have a uniform and standardized view of how they are performing to ensure solution performance, how much they are, how active they are on the network, what their usage patterns are, so that you can understand costs and have those costs be predictable, and then also be able to troubleshoot those devices, ability, so that if an issue, be able to identify those issues and fix those issues faster. Ultimately, being able to put all those devices on a single platform, regardless of the underlying technology, regardless of the underlying platform, or even location, is one solution that's going to go a long way to reduce the complexities of that solution and enable you to scale that solution effectively. And really, the technology becomes extracted from your, what you really need to think about from an operational perspective, and that just becomes the network, on which the device sends the information back to you. And depending on location, depending on lots of different requirements, you can take advantage of each technology that works best for you. And having a platform that can support all those technologies is something that not every provider is going to be able to have. A lot of providers are going to specialize, and we'll touch on that in just a second. But what it really allows you to do is to create unique and advanced solutions. One example of that is being able to combine networks into a hybrid solution. For example, being able to combine coverage and Wi-Fi, cellular and Wi-Fi into a single subscription, so that the device has the ability to connect to Wi-Fi networks in a secure and managed way, manage those credentials from the platform. But when the Wi-Fi networks are not available, switch over to cellular networks to take advantage of the coverage benefits there. By having all the technologies on a single platform, you can now start to work towards these solutions that not only are going to give you even more advantages over single technology deployment, but also allow you to start creating some innovative solutions that are going to help you differentiate your solution in the marketplace. Giving you the ability to control and manage and combine those technologies is only possible if they're all living on a single platform. And that's really what's going to help you optimize your deployment and take advantage of all those costs. And then finally, the last topic, in this section is really getting into how that becomes achievable. As I mentioned, most providers are going to specialize. Connectivity providers are going to specialize on what they do best. Cellular providers are largely going to specialize in cellular. Wi-Fi providers are going to specialize in Wi-Fi and down on the road. Connectivity by itself is not necessarily flexible. Platforms are what enable that flexibility. One thing to look for when evaluating different platform options is to look for an open platform, if you will, a platform that can integrate those technologies, not only for providers that can give you access to multiple technologies, but also allow you to bring your own technologies and your own connectivity to the table. You should not be restricted to the rates that a provider gives you. You should be able to negotiate your own agreements with multiple providers. Go find the technologies, go find the agreements that work best for you, that help you optimize your solution, and then bring those all onto a single platform. Platforms that can ingest, for example, APIs from carriers or from Wi-Fi providers or from other network providers. to integrate all the visibility, all the reporting, all the cost control into a single platform so that you have a uniform and standardized view of all your deployments is what's going to go a very, very long way to helping you solve this technology complexity, these technology complexity issues that are in the IoT marketplace today. And so, my final recommendation is as you plan out your solution, as you plan out your next generation solution, recognize that connectivity management platforms are essential for ensuring solution performance, for controlling your costs, for making sure that your solution works well and can scale. And in this new evolving IoT landscape with new technologies that do add value, no single technology is going to give you everything that you need. There is no single technology that is, hands down the best above all of them. They each have their own benefits and each have their own limitations. And so look for ways to take advantage of those technologies, take advantage of their benefits, and minimize the complexities and the operational challenges that come along with managing that mixed technology deployment. And our recommendation is look for platforms that can give you that seamless ability to manage and control all of your devices, regardless of the underlying carrier, underlying technology, underlying provider. Give you the control, give you the flexibility to optimize your deployment. So with that, I will wrap up, and I'll hand it back to Scott, and we can start asking or answering your questions.
Sure. That's great, Evan. Thank you so much. One question I had, and I'm going to get to some of the audience questions, is you mentioned a little bit about supply chain as part of the presentation early on. I wanted to ask, is there a way that these management platforms can help automate some of the supply chain process? Because I know with enterprises, the supply chain is always the trickiest part of the business to control. So if we're using IoT to improve the supply chain process, can the management platforms help automate some of those parts of the supply chain to kind of give you a little bit more efficiency within there?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm glad you asked me to expand on that because it is widely applicable to IoT solutions. One of the the challenges with IoT solutions is how to install or distribute efficiently. And, it is not always easy for the end user to go through an activation process. An example might be in the healthcare space. Home healthcare devices that are going to patients maybe with chronic conditions are oftentimes going to elderly patients who don't know or have the technical capabilities to activate devices once they receive them. So then suppliers are forced to activate early on in their supply chain and in absence of a management platform, that can be a very manual process that slows down the rate at which devices can leave the factory. Not only that, but they then have to incur all the connectivity costs from when they activate it to when it gets deployed, or sent to the home. That could take several weeks. That can take several months. That can take a year, depending on the business model and the how many distribution channels are used. What a platform can allow users to do, allow solution providers to do is activate when it is in the factory, but place it in a non-billable state, for example, where it can have network connectivity but not incur any ongoing network connectivity costs. Therefore, it can make its way all the way through the supply chain at no additional cost to the solution provider. And then when it reaches its end deployment, it has out-of-the-box connectivity, meaning it just needs to be powered on. Platforms have the ability to track usage and set billing triggers so that when the device does get powered on and it starts sending data, then it will be automatically flipped into a billable state and resume or start its normal connectivity and normal billing behavior. But all those triggers and the ability to automate that whole process is really only possible if you have a management platform.
That's interesting to know. One question that we had come up from the audience from Felix is something about prevention control within the management platform. So you have something that's going to be able to help control this network through the management platforms. And I mean, is that about shutting down or resetting or flashing you over an alert? Or what do you kind of see in the management platforms as far as getting a little bit more control over these over these devices if you're kind of sitting there and monitoring how this network is working?
Sure. So first it starts with being able to identify those issues and identify those issues proactively. It's not good for anybody, as I mentioned earlier, if the customer, the end user calls to report an issue. You want to be notified of those things ahead of time. And that really starts with proactive alerts. So, platform's ability to create customizable alerts that can basically define, typical device behavior from a connectivity standpoint. How often it's supposed to communicate, the amount of volume it's supposed to send, the amount of data it's supposed to send when it does communicate. Be able to set parameters around what you define, as a solution owner, as typical device behavior. And then be notified in an automated email alert, for example, if the device operates outside of that behavior, whether it's the device hasn't reported in several weeks, or whether it's exceeded its monthly allotment of data, or its daily allotment of what it's supposed to do. So you use a platform to be notified of issues faster. Then the platform addresses the second piece, which is being able to do something about it without having to send somebody down to the device. Platform capabilities such as clearing registration on a cellular network, for example, which is basically kicking a device off the network and forcing it to re-register if it's not communicating properly. The ability to, say, for example, block traffic to a device from the network level so that if there is excessive usage, if there's concern that there's fraudulent use, basically temporarily suspend that device's connectivity until you can investigate the issue further, stop the bleeding while you triage and identify, is there a security threat, is this fraudulent usage, or is there a firmware bug that's causing the device to send more data than it's supposed to? So you can prevent the overage charges and also prevent any further damage in the case of a security breach. So, those two categories of being able to identify those issues faster and then remote troubleshooting tools to do something about it once you've identified that issue.
And that's interesting because we get to the whole security part of it, part and parcel of this, and it's such a concern because if you have thousands of devices, they're all hooked into the internet, they're all vulnerable, and management is a way to kind of at least take some of the risk out of that. So what are you seeing as far as when you're talking with your customers or you're out in the field? What do they have specific concerns about management and security, or is it more just in general, geez, if I do this, am I going to get into trouble at some point if there's a breach or if somebody finds a way to hack into to a particular device?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really, I see that being, kind of in two categories. I think a lot of solution providers, a lot of solution builders who have maybe, working on their next gen deployment or something along those lines, have a higher recognition as to the importance of security features or secure capabilities. They've been there before and they've, going back to what I mentioned, part of, succeeding in IoT is planning for success. And so they are thinking, what else lies around the corner that we need to be thinking about now? I think unfortunately for a lot of people building IoT solutions for the first time, security is a bit of an afterthought. It does present additional design challenges. It does present additional costs up front to make sure that the solution is designed to be secure. And that's not something that a lot of people think is necessary for the first, their first deployment or their first entry into IoT. That becomes a large risk because, while you're getting started in your first round of deployments, if you've got a couple hundred units out there, you're vulnerable at that stage, and one security breach can kind of ruin your plans. And so not thinking through the security aspects of it, that's a conversation we have with a lot of providers of, here are some of the things around security that you should be thinking about if you aren't already. Now, fortunately, a connectivity management platform can help offset some of that because you are more in control once the devices get out there in the field. Because you have visibility, you can identify those issues. But security is absolutely something that should be planned for, that should be thought through, and should be top of mind as you're building a solution in planning out your go-to-market strategies.
Interesting. Thanks. The other question, I had a couple questions come through, and maybe you can explain this a little bit more. And it's more Aeris specific than it is on the management platform. Do you guys work with all different platforms, and you just kind of help facilitate the conversation between the customer and what they're hoping to do, or does Aeris sort of favor one over the other? It's a little bit of a biased question, but we have a couple folks from the audience wondering what exactly does Aeris do? Do you have the management platform, or do you kind of just facilitate that conversation? And do you kind of pick a favorite out of some of the stuff that we've talked about today?
Sure. No, good question. And so, historically we have been primarily a cellular connectivity provider. Again, going back to the traditional nature of the traditional landscape of IoT, that worked for solutions that were that have been deployed. As we look to the future, we are expanding to additional technologies. We are starting to directly provide Wi-Fi capabilities, for example, and are evaluating providing additional technologies, including NB-IoT. We're already providing LTE-M. So, from an Aeris providing technology standpoint, we do have several different options, but historically we've been focused on cellular. Our management platform, however, has been designed to work with all technologies and has been built with a connectivity adaptation layer that can ingest APIs from really any provider supporting any technology to make the management capabilities applicable to those devices, bring those devices of any technology onto the platform. For that single pane of glass, the single management layer. And that could be whether or not we provide that or not, kind of bring your own carrier concept. That connectivity adaptation layer allows, our customers to bring whatever technologies they want, whatever provider, underlying carrier they want, even in the cellular world, and put those all under the platform view. So it is both. We do provide connectivity and provide the platform, and for us, we focus a lot on building, build that out to be as flexible as possible.
And in that same vein, and we're coming to the top of the hour, so we're probably going to want to start wrapping a little bit. But I think one last little question that came in, it sort of relates to what we just talked about. Satellite, do you support anything along that, or do you see that as a viable solution, or is that something left to somebody else?
No, sure, great question. So, we don't provide satellite connectivity today in a resale model, for example. But again, our platform can support integration to manage satellite deployment. And so, for us, and I know that we are at the hour, so I'll wrap up very quickly. Satellite is something that we have scoped out, we can support, and if that's a requirement for a customer, that's something that we can expand those capabilities for them, relatively low effort. So, if for whoever asked that question out in the audience, if you want to learn more information about how we can support that. And for anybody else, if you have any additional questions and want to learn more about anything that I've talked about, please feel free to reach out to sales@aeris.net, and I can even reference and I'd be happy to be put in contact with you to answer any questions.
Well, that's great, Evan, and thank you so much. And as Evan just mentioned, we are coming up to the top of the hour, so we have to wrap up our webinar for now, but maybe Evan will be back at another time to talk a little bit more about IoT. Before we do go for the day, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask everybody to fill out our survey. As Katie mentioned at the top of the hour, the survey gives us valuable feedback and allows us to make these webinars even better. So we really do appreciate any information that you can give us. And as we always mention, these surveys only take a few seconds out of your time. So please feel free to fill that out when you get a second. Again, it's very valuable to us. We can't emphasize that enough, and it gives us just the valuable feedback and makes these experiences a lot more better for our audience when they tune in. So once again, our guest today to talk about IoT and connectivity and management was Evan Whitelock, a product manager for Aeris. Evan, thank you very much for spending some time with us this morning and this afternoon. We do appreciate it. And as I mentioned before, my name is Scott Ferguson. I'm one of the editors of Enterprise Cloud News. We thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We appreciate your time and attention, as well as some of the great questions and answers that we had. And I can't sign off without thanking Katie, who is our project manager extraordinaire and makes everything work behind the scenes. So Katie, thank you very much for all your efforts today. And with that, have a great Thursday and a very nice weekend, and hopefully we will talk to you again very soon.